Welcome to Forgotten Football Club's podcast. 50 clubs across the world, gone but never forgotten.
I'm your host, Phil, and I have my co-host here, Rory. What's up, Rory?
Hey mate, how's it going? Been a bit of a while since we last done a podcast, so it's good to be back. I'm excited.
Yeah. I mean, look, this has been a long time coming, as you probably already know, Rory. This is all down to the release of my debut book, Forgotten Football Clubs, 50 clubs across the world, that only just recently came out. And just a quick introduction, we're basically on this podcast going to be covering the 50 clubs that are in the book, and we're going to do it randomly. Now, today we're actually going to pick chapters 1 and chapters 2, and they would be clubs Sporting Fingal from the Republic of Ireland. And Rory, what's the club you're going to speak about?
So I am going to be talking about FC Amsterdam from the Netherlands.
Perfect. Look, two great clubs. I really enjoyed researching about them and writing about them. And yeah, hopefully you love learning about them as well. We'll start off, as I said, with Sporting Fingal FC from the Republic of Ireland, my own country. And I suppose there's a little bit of an emotional attachment to this story because I actually used to follow Sporting Fingal, and they are the catalyst to forgotten football clubs, really, because unfortunately they aren't around anymore, hence why they are in this book and on this podcast. You know, Ireland has 41 clubs that have dissolved or left the League of Ireland, the National League in the Republic of Ireland, since it started in 1922. A lot of them clubs are actually from one area, from two areas, the capital Dublin and then another county, County Cork. But Sporting Fingal, yeah, they are a Dublin club. I say that with inverted commas because Sporting Fingal is actually from a county called County Fingal, which, if any of our Irish listeners know, is a big enough area to kind of say that they are their own county, if you know what I mean. They're separate from Dublin. They're not separate from Dublin, they are from Dublin. So we'll keep it simple, Rory, okay? For those who aren't from Ireland. Basically, they were founded back in 2007, so only recently, really. It was a project started by the Fingal County Council and property developer Jerry Gannon. So Jerry Gannon is, as I said, a property developer, but we'll just, again, keep it simple and say a really rich man. And basically, they had the idea that they were going to bring League of Ireland football to the area of Fingal. It's an area that didn't have football represented. So in contrast, let's just say, to our listeners outside of Ireland, it would be like, say, Ipswich, Norfolk, not having a football club represented in the English league. Or do you have a better example?
Yeah, I suppose so. I suppose it would be something maybe like the Scottish Borders not having a team in the higher leagues, or the SPFL, sorry, I should say. Obviously, you have Queen of the South, who are based in Dumfries and Galloway, and a number of smaller junior teams and Lowland League teams there. But Dumfries and Galloway, although it is close to the border, some people might not actually consider it to be the Borders, so to speak. And I suppose there was one prominent team from the Borders, which I thought were quite similar to what happened to Fingal, but we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But yeah, I mean, it's basically kind of like the Borders region, where there isn't really a representative team competing in the SPFL or the higher Scottish league, so to say.
Yeah, like, I mean, to put it in context, Fingal, the County Fingal area has a population of 250,000 people. And yeah, there's no football club to represent it. Now, people will argue that, Bohemians and Shelbourne, who are both still playing League of Ireland football in the Premier Division, are both close enough. But realistically, on a Friday night, it would take probably an hour to get to either of those stadiums from, say, the capital town, Swords. So it's not a viable option for many. But back to Sporting Fingal, they were granted basically to play at Morton Stadium, which is a bit of a playground for League of Ireland clubs, because Shamrock Rovers played there. Another forgotten club, Dublin City, used to play there. And while it is a football stadium, has a football pitch, it's actually a kind of an athletic stadium, has a running track around it. It's not the greatest, to be honest, for atmosphere or anything like that. You can go on YouTube and look up matches and stuff like that. Especially, there's one great match between Rovers and Bows, which would probably epitomise what Morton Stadium's like. But it did the job, I suppose, to start off with a start off club. They adopted the colours, black and green, as their home colours, and their away colours were white. So basically the Fingal colours, and their crest was a raven with a green backdrop. The raven again is the crest of Fingal itself. The original plan was that they were actually going to apply for what was known as, I suppose, the third tier of Irish football. It was the Championship A, and they were going to go into that to start off. But another club actually dropped out, Kilkenny City, or EMFA as they were known, and basically a spot opened up in the first division for Fingal in 2007. They took it, and manager Liam Buckley took over alongside Conor Byrne, who was kind of like he was a player, of course, but he was also kind of in charge of other things like supporter, liaison, managing director and stuff like that. So they were the two kind of heads of the club going into their first ever season in the first division. It started off, I mean, it was quite moderate, really. The first ever game was against just a relegated Longford Town down in Flancare Park. Personally, I actually went down to the game with a few of my friends. Sporting Fingal actually took the lead, surprisingly. It was a Peter Hines goal from 40 yards, and actually, to this day, it's probably the best live goal I've ever seen in League of Ireland football, which is funny. He basically lobbed the keeper from 40 yards, and Fingal took the lead 1-0. Unfortunately, the game ended 5-1 to Longford, so the cheering was short-lived. But it was a good way to whet the appetite for me and my friends who continue then to go watch Fingal around the first division around the country, going to places like Athlone, Galway, Salthill, Devon, stuff like that. And more and more fans started kind of buying into the Fingal idea, Sporting Fingal project. Now, Liam Buckley, I'll always remember, had a meeting with the fans in Swords when this all started, and their plans were it was kind of like an Atletico Bilbao. Sporting Fingal would help develop youth from the schoolboy clubs around the area, take them on, and would just play them into Sporting Fingal senior team eventually, and grow a bit of a community spirit and attachment with the players, with the team, to the supporters. In theory, it sounds great. It sounds like a great idea, and people jumped on that. The other thing that they also said that was standing out was that they would get European football within 5 years, and we will get to that now in a few moments' time. But it was an ambitious project to start off with, just to say that. As we'll find out, the ambitions were met. In their first season, as I said, they relatively done okay. They finished fourth out of the 10 clubs, so it wasn't too bad. They won 17, drew 11, and lost 8. But they also had the top goal scorer of that division amongst their ranks. Rory, I'll let you guess who the top goal scorer was. It wasn't Conor Byrne, by the way.
The top scorer in their ranks would have been, was it the Libyan player Eamon Zayed?
No, he didn't join until they were in the Premier Division. So we're talking about their first season here.
The first season.
What we'll do, we'll wait until the end of the podcast, the episode, and we'll leave that as a question for our listeners. And if anybody can get it, there might be a little prize on offer for that, okay? But let's just say they had the top goal scorer in their ranks in the first division that year. The second season was a little bit better. There was a bit of to and fro, though, from the first division and stuff like that. For example, Cove were taken out of League of Ireland altogether because they didn't get a first division licence. It was all quite bizarre, really. League of Ireland, typical League of Ireland stuff, Rory. Obviously, if you follow League of Ireland, you'll know there's never a season when there's no dramatics or no kind of controversy. And Cove that season was the controversy. But it was the second season that Sporting Fingal put their name in the history books of Irish football. Once again, expectations had been realistic, and a playoff spot was the target for Fingal. They were in a race basically in the first division with UCD, a known club that are kind of a yo-yo club. It's no skin off their teeth because UCD, University College Dublin, well funded. They're never going to go bust, and they're a well-oiled machine, a well-run football club because they are one of the biggest colleges in Ireland. So why wouldn't they be? So basically, it was between Sporting Fingal and Shelbourne to try get that kind of a playoff spot. And fortunately, Sporting Fingal got it. they got that playoff spot, beating Shells through it, and they had to play a Bray Wanderers side. Bray, of course, in the first division at the moment, and they have their own struggles at the moment. But they played Bray Wanderers in this playoff, and they ended up winning, and they got promoted to the Premier Division after only 2 seasons in the first division, which was, it wasn't expected, but it wasn't a huge shock either, and it was something that a lot of people in the Fingal area kind of stood up and took notice of. However, that wasn't even the big news of that season, Rory. Surprising. You think getting promoted in your second season of existence would be the big news, the big hot topic, but it wasn't. The big news was Sporting Fingal actually won their first major trophy that year, and that was the FAI Cup, which they won in dramatic fashion. It was played at Tallaght Stadium, and they were playing against West of Ireland side Sligo Rovers. You may know Sligo Rovers as they were a club who beat Motherwell last year in the Europa League. Is that correct? Or the Europa Conference League, is it?
I do, yeah. A big, at the time, I think a lot of people were expecting Motherwell to kind of steamroll Sligo because there's that sort of perception of the League of Ireland over here. But as it would be found out, the manager of Motherwell at that time, Graham Alexander, wasn't very good. So whether or not it was still a huge result or whether it was more expected, that's for other people to decide.
Yeah, and it was a big one for Sporting Fingal to beat Sligo in the final. Now, just to go through quite quickly the clubs that they faced Sporting Fingal to get there, it was the 89th edition of the FAI Cup at the time. They beat Cork side, Blarney United FC, they're a non-league side. They then beat Munster Senior League side, FC Carlow, in the second round. They then beat Athlone Town, who were a first division club at the time. They also beat Shamrock Rovers in the quarter-final. Basically, that was a big scalp. And once they beat Shamrock Rovers, it was kind of like people were thinking maybe their name is written on the trophy. But they beat them. And then they beat Bray Wanderers, who they beat in the playoff. They also beat them in the semi-final to set up the final against Sligo Rovers, which was played at Tallaght Stadium. I can tell you it was a wet and windy day at Tallaght Stadium. Sligo took the lead thanks to Owen Doyle, who's actually playing for St. Pat's at the moment. And you may know Owen Doyle. He was his goal scoring exploits over in England with Swindon Town and Bolton Wanderers. But he's now back playing League of Ireland. But yeah, back then he was the man who was heading Sligo Rovers' attack, and he scored what looked like it was going to be the winner for Sligo Rovers. And a lot of us were kind of hoping and praying that Fingal could find something, and they did. They pulled it back, 1-1 in the 89th minute, and then they scored a winner. It was a man named Gary O'Neill scored in the 90th minute to send Fingal fans absolutely mental. I can tell you, everybody went crazy. It was one of those moments that I'll never forget, and one of those moments that make Sporting Fingal quite a memorable side in the Ireland. And
it was a 90th minute winner, wasn't it?
Yeah. It was crazy. The game itself was attended by just over 8,000 people, which is quite small, but Tallaght Stadium is a smaller stadium. Of course, the League of Ireland, the FAI Cup final is now played at the Aviva Stadium, but at the time it was only Tallaght, and 8,000 people watched that game. And I could tell you, to be honest, if I'm being honest, most of them were Sligo fans. Sligo probably brought about 5,000, maybe more. Fingal probably only had probably about 1,500, 2,000. It doesn't sound great, and it's probably why, in the end, they're in this book and why we're talking about it on the podcast. But winning the FAI Cup, Rory, doesn't only get you the prestigious old trophy, it also gets you a place in the Europa League as well, like winning any domestic trophy. So, in that case, Liam Buckley, who had predicted that Sporting Fingal within 5 years of starting up would be playing European football, he actually brought it home, and it actually happened. They drew Portuguese Premier side Marítimo, who are actually from the island Madeira. So this was kind of a big deal, getting Marítimo, who lock arms with the likes of Porto, Benfica, Sporting Lisbon, who are all big clubs in their own right. So Sporting Fingal drew them, and while there was nothing to be expected, nobody expected Sporting Fingal to go through in the tie. Because of recruitments that summer, of Glenn Crowe. And then, of course, who you mentioned, the Libyan international, Eamon Zayed, also joined Sporting Fingal. Other players like Ronan Finn, Sean Williams. Ronan Finn, obviously, with Rovers at the moment. Sean Williams, I think he's at Millwall or MK Dons or Portsmouth. He played for all three. I don't know who he's with at the moment, but Sean Williams, he's obviously an Irish international as well. He was playing with Sporting Fingal. So, they had a quite a good side going into this tie. And they put up a good fight away from home. They lost the game 3-2 over in Portugal in Madeira, which was quite a feat. At one point, we actually thought we were going to win the game, but unfortunately, Madeira's experience and skill told, and that's why they won the game. But it wasn't, as I said, lack of trying. They nearly did, as I say, win the game. They nearly drew the game. Maritimo grabbed a late winner in the first leg, and 3-2. So Fingal brought them back to Dublin. They didn't play the game in Morton because Morton, as I said, isn't a suitable arena even for maybe League of Ireland matches, never mind European football. So the second leg was played at Dalymount Park, the home of Irish football and the home of Bohemians FC. And unfortunately, they lost that game as well, 3-2. So it was a short day in the Europa League for Sporting Fingal, and yeah, it was still interesting though. Liam Buckley promised European football. He got it. But it was at this point the wheels looked like they started coming off. In 2008, 2009, of course, we all know a recession hit here in Ireland. And unfortunately, Mr. Jerry Gannon, as I mentioned, who was a property developer, he got hit bad by it. I don't want to say a company, but a kind of organisation known as NAMA. People in Ireland will know all about them. If you're not from Ireland, you can look it up. But they basically took away his assets, and he kind of went, I don't want to say he went bankrupt, but a lot of his stuff had to be liquidated. And unfortunately, Sporting Fingal were one of those assets. The Fingal County Council refused to put any more money into it. There was attempts by some of the players to ask some of the fans if they could fund it and maybe make Sporting Fingal a fan-owned club. But unfortunately, as I mentioned, there wasn't enough fans around to kind of do this, and there wasn't enough appetite. And while the recession obviously hit, people like Jerry Gannon, property developers, they were also hitting the pockets of the normal people. They did play one season in the Premier Division in which they actually finished fourth, which actually gained them European qualification for the next season, and it gained them qualification for the Setanta Cup, which is an All-Ireland Cup that was created to kind of build bridges, I suppose, between Northern Ireland and Ireland and their football clubs. It's not around anymore, so that tells its own story. But unfortunately, Sporting Fingal didn't get to play in that. UCD actually took their spot. And as I said, despite having a good season in the Premier Division and qualifying for Europa League once again, they failed to actually play it out because they went bust in 2010 officially. So therefore, it was only 3 seasons Sporting Fingal were around, 2 in the first division, 1 in the Premier. They had a little stint in Europa League. When I say little, they played 1 tie, and they won the FAI Cup. And that's basically the story of Sporting Fingal.
It's quite interesting because from obviously what you mentioned in the book and from what you said, there's a lot of comparisons that can be drawn with Gretna FC. Gretna FC were a team who played in the Scottish division previously. They played briefly in English football as well. And they'd been around for quite some time. They were founded in 1946, and they played in the sort of lower echelons of Scottish football. And eventually, when Scottish football restructured, they took the place of Airdrieonians, who went bust at the time, and were facing a lot of financial difficulties themselves. So they took their place in the Scottish Football League at that point within I think it was the 3rd division or Division 3 it was called. But basically, what happened then, and it's quite similar to Sporting Fingal, whereas Gretna obviously have a much more sustained history, being around for in total 77 years. In 2002, Gretna were bought over by a gentleman called Brooks Mileson. Now, Brooks Mileson unfortunately passed away in 2008 due to health difficulties, which is absolutely awful and is actually part of their story. But Brooks Mileson pretty much funneled and shoveled as much money as he possibly could into Gretna. at the time, when it got to the 2004-2005 season, they'd signed some big names. They'd signed Steve Tosh from Aberdeen in their midfield. They even spent £100,000 on a winger from Stranraer called David Graham. Now, at the time, for a club in the third division to be signing a player who, and I think Stranraer were in the same division, if not only one tier higher than them, maybe two at a push, but to be signing a player for £100,000 that's around the same level as you was a huge amount of money. Huge amount of money. So they built this kind of team of really, really, really good players. In that season, in 2004-2005, I believe it was, they got promoted from the third division. And then the following season, they get promoted from the second. And then the following season, they get promoted from the first into the Scottish Premier Division, which is insane. That's 3 back-to-back promotions at the very least. It's not even 3 back-to-back promotions, it's 3 back-to-back titles. And in that period of time, they scored just under 300 goals. Absolute insanity. So obviously at the time, this was kind of being coined as the fairy tale story of Gretna. Now, rumours started coming around that Brooks Mileson wasn't doing too well in terms of his health. Okay. And this is when things started to get a little bit shaky. But before anything actually happened in terms of that, Gretna actually managed to make it to a Scottish Cup final. which is mad. So basically, I think it was a 2007-2008 season. They went on this Scottish Cup run, which was apologies. It was the 2006 Scottish Cup that they went on their cup run. They beat Dundee 3-0 in the semi-final, which was massive in itself, and they became the first team from the third tier of Scottish football to actually reach the final. So they were playing Hearts. But they actually managed to take them to penalties after they drew 1-1, which again is absolutely nuts. Unfortunately, they lost out on penalties, which is a big heartbreak. So they didn't win that. But because they came runners-up, they actually were able to qualify for the UEFA Cup.
Yeah.
And I know I'm kind of laughing, but it's just one of those things where, it's this team that within 3 years has went from absolutely nothing to being one of the biggest names in the country because, people are like, well, who are these guys,
I actually remember. I remember the story because I know who they got in European football. They got Derry, didn't they?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So familiar names, obviously, but Derry beat them 7-3 on aggregate. Now, because Gretna's stadium, Radio Park, because Radio wasn't up to UEFA standards, they actually had to play their home games for the season. They were in the Scottish Premier League and in the Europa League. For Park, which is Motherwell Stadium. Now, this isn't ideal for a number of reasons. Firstly, Gretna to Motherwell is at least an hour drive. It's 75 miles away. So for a team, that's obviously going to be a huge ask. But for fans, it's going to be even bigger. So because of Brooke Mileson's health problems, unfortunately, he had to take a step back from the club. And I don't know who it was. There's different rumours around it, and I'm not going to go into that. But basically, his finances that were holding the club up basically got pulled from underneath him overnight, and by 2008 they were gone.
Around the same time as Sporting Fingal, so around the early or the late 2000s wasn't a great time for Irish or Scottish football. By the sounds of it, it sounds like the recession hit. Yeah. Well, it probably did. It probably was one of the reasons.
That's what I was going to say. So, I mean, just before we kind of quickly move on, just to sum up, it's quite interesting how you've got these two teams here that started off as, really bright flames, so to speak, and they just burnt out so quickly. So, I mean, obviously, you can draw the similarities between the two teams. It's quite an interesting comparison, actually. It kind of sums up what I kind of call the Setanta era, if you like, not for any particular reason, just because I associate it with it.
Well, I could tell you as we'll go through other episodes and go through the other clubs in the book that feature. It is a familiar story. Some football clubs, as you put it, Rory, start off as a bright flame and then just kind of wilt away after three seasons. There's one or two clubs that I've written about that only lasted one season. In my research, even other clubs only lasted half a season. Unfortunately, it is something that either rich owners or whoever is in charge of the project, they try run before they can walk. Basically, that's the phrase I always use.
Absolutely, it's as much as kind of retrospectively, at the time, it was a lot of, the media were saying, this is a fairy tale, it's a fairy tale cup run for Gretna, etc., etc. Retrospectively, it was nothing of the sort. Ultimately, they had a lot of money, they were given a lot of money, they spent it, and then the money get taken away. And in my opinion, anyway, that's not a fairy tale. So,
No,
interesting comparisons.
Yeah, definitely. We're actually going to now go on to our next club here, FC Amsterdam. But of course, Rory, if you've read the book like you have yourself, you'll know that it's not all black and white with these lads, and they weren't always called FC Amsterdam. Do you want to tell us a bit about them?
Absolutely. Really, really interesting club, actually. So, FC Amsterdam in name were founded in 1972, but beforehand, they actually merged, and it was a merger between two clubs. I'm gonna absolutely butcher these translations, so you know what? I'm not even gonna try. So it was a merger between two clubs. The first was called Blauw-Wit, I believe.
Yeah,
is how it's pronounced.
Blauw-Wit.
Blauw-Wits. There you go. Which in English translates into the blue-white because they wore blue and white, and DWS. And beforehand, those clubs actually came around because of the results of different mergers as well. So there's a long history of these clubs kind of coming into being through mergers. And as we see in clubs from our respective nations, well, I'm assuming for Ireland, but certainly in Scotland anyway, that's something that was quite common, particularly in the early 1900s when football was sort of struggling to find its feet in a professional sense in other countries.
Funny enough, Rory, in Ireland, and sorry, just a point, in Ireland, merging wasn't a big thing. And I found this throughout the book that it's more predominantly a mainland Europe thing, where a lot of clubs, especially places like Germany, Holland, France, merged together, and Hungary and stuff like that. But Ireland, Ireland, there's not a lot of clubs merged together now.
See, in the early 1900s in Scotland, there was a couple of mergers, I think, but it was mainly, sort of teams that were based maybe close to each other that were struggling to attract fans. And some of them ended up liquidating as well and becoming defunct. The most recent notorious example, if you like, was a plan by, now I think it was in the 70s or 80s. It was the Hibs chairman at the time, or the Hearts chairman, actually suggested that Heart of Midlothian and Hibernian Football Club, both of Edinburgh, merged. Now, for the listeners who don't know, the Edinburgh derby is contested between Hearts and Hibs. It's a huge derby. It's a great spectacle most of the time. But, the suggestion even that those two clubs had merged was absolutely ridiculous. But basically, FC Amsterdam came into being after this merger in 1972. Now, the clubs that merged into them had quite a decent history beforehand as well. So DWS managed to gain promotion to the Eredivisie and then win it in back-to-back seasons. And that was in 1964, so that was quite interesting. And DWS were actually the last club to win the Dutch Eredivisie title, who didn't wear a predominantly red and white home jersey, which I found quite interesting. Obviously, the others being PSV, Ajax, Feyenoord, AZ Alkmaar and FC Twente. So I thought that was quite a cool wee fact. That was really interesting. DWS, after the merger, continued on as an amateur club. And with a lot of clubs who end up merging, that's what you see is a lot of the teams who have merged, if they go through a name change, they continue in some form of element. And from what I said earlier on about, some clubs merge because they struggle to attract home fans, there's going to be quite a common theme with MC Amsterdam, or in my opinion anyway. So just because of the different mergers. So basically, in the 1973-74 season, the club managed to finish 5th in the Eredivisie, which is a pretty good finish, I'd say. I mean, you're talking about an era where Feyenoord were really, really going strong. Ajax, you still had PSV Eindhoven, so finishing 5th out of all of those is a pretty good going. I mean, the Eredivisie, as much as people wouldn't like to think, is still a very competitive league. So, that's pretty good going. And that actually got them qualification into the UEFA Cup. So the first team they played was Hibernians, based in Malta, 12-0 on aggregate. Easy going, absolutely steamrolled them. So on they went. But, considering it was our first UEFA Cup game, as FC Amsterdam was the first UEFA Cup game, they only managed to attract 3,000 fans, which isn't great. whereas Ajax managed to attract 29,000 for their game in the same competition in the same round when they played Stoke. So it's not really a strong attendance. So they were drawn against Inter Milan. But from reading it, and a lot of people at the time as well thought, this is it, that's the end of that. We've come up against one of the giants of European football. And not a lot of people gave them a chance, but they actually beat them 2-1 at the San Siro. And it was Nico Jansen who scored a brace, which is incredible. I mean, that's an absolutely incredible result. But it was bolstered by the fact that the home leg ended in a 0-0 draw, which saw them go through. Now, obviously, you're playing one of the biggest teams in European football, and they're a very, very popular team throughout Europe, Inter Milan.
Of course.
You've beat them 2-1 at home, and you're taking them to your home ground. If this was, now, obviously, for the avoidance of any doubt, in the League of Ireland, Phil is a St. Pat's fan, St. Patrick's Athletic.
Yeah.
I support Celtic, and I follow a number of other teams as well. But if this was St. Patrick's Athletic, Phil, you'd beat Inter 2-1 at the San Siro, and you'd brought them back to your home ground. Would you expect it to be a sellout?
It would be. Do you know what? They wouldn't play it at St. Pat's. They'd play it at the Aviva because they'd actually get more fans in. So you'd be expecting about Inter Milan. Pat's against Inter Milan in a European competition. You'd be looking at. This is my personal opinion. Whether they'll all go support Pats or not, they'd definitely go to be watching Inter Milan. You'd probably get 30,000, to be honest.
I mean, that's a fantastic number. I mean, you would certainly expect the fans to come in their droves. The home leg that ended in a 0-0 draw that saw them defeat Inter Milan and go through was attended by only 8,600 people, which I think is, obviously, yeah. I mean, it is quite poor. I mean, obviously, you're getting through to the next round of the UEFA Cup, and you've beaten one of the giants of the game. I would expect there to be a lot more, and I would expect people to rally around them a lot more. So they reached the third round, and they're going on this great run. And they came up against Fortuna Düsseldorf of Germany. They managed to beat them 5-1 in aggregate, so pretty simple affair. They beat them 2-1 at the Rijnstadion as well, so they got an away win. Nico Jansen as well, the scoreline, and Nico Jansen went on to be a fantastic player. He's a name that's maybe not synonymous with Dutch football, but he's certainly up there. Great player. So they then drew against Cologne, or FC Cologne, who were a much better team at the time, and they proved just to be too much for FC Amsterdam. So they beat them 5-1 in the first leg. To basically, that's going to be it. If you come up against that. So FC Amsterdam took them back to the Olympic Stadium and were beaten 3-2 again. So they went out of the UEFA Cup, unfortunately. Now, as I said, with the lack of fans coming to the game being an indicator of bigger problems, that kind of raised its head again, because that was actually to be the peak of their achievements. Now, in the 1977-78 season, they were relegated from the Eredivisie into the second tier, which is the Eerste Divisie. And, for a club that's just been on a fantastic European run and finished fifth in the Eredivisie, you would expect them to bounce back and come straight back up. Sadly, that wasn't to be. They finished ninth, but they were actually only 4 points off a playoff spot, so you can assume it was maybe a pretty tight league. And again, they went into the following season hoping they'd be challenging for promotion, but they actually fell further down the table and they finished 16th, 3 points above relegation. So it was tight, and it's a sign of this kind of decline that you often see, because if you're going into your third season in the second tier, then the little fan base that you had is going to become less and less, and it's going to start dwindling. And that turned out to be the case, because the following campaign was their last. So they finished 13th, so it's better than 16th, but their attendances dwindled because of lack of success. And they ended up withdrawn from the league and disbanded, which seems quite... I don't know, and this is the thing, because we'll maybe need to research it a bit more to find out if that was the only factor. But that seemed to me like quite a drastic move and almost quite reactive. Or maybe they were just looking ahead and trying to think proactively and think, well, our fan base basically isn't here anymore. So they had quite a short history of being FC Amsterdam, but they had some great players on their books. Nico Jansen obviously went on to play for Feyenoord. He scored 43 and 68 for them, which is fantastic. And obviously you interviewed Martin, who quite a fan of FC Amsterdam. You know, he wrote a book about them. He seemed quite enamoured by the whole idea of them, and I suppose they are, you know, just based on the history, they're quite a fascinating club in terms of that short stint they had with the rename. But again, you had this thing where teams had merged so many times that maybe the fans have got sick of them and they'd went off to support their counterparts that had reformed as amateur teams, which is fair enough. You can completely understand that.
Yeah, I think the whole story with FC Amsterdam is basically there wasn't enough room for two big clubs in one kind of city. So you have Ajax, who obviously have now gone on to be the biggest club in Amsterdam, and it's kind of like they just, the fans just went, oh, you know, we could work at this with FC Amsterdam, but we don't really want it. It's like they never got on board with it. Whether that's because it was a merger of two clubs that maybe didn't get on with each other, two sets of fans, and didn't get on with each other, so they said, right, let's cut our losses and just go follow Ajax. You know, there was no definite answer to it. But Martin was quite complimentary about them in the interview and stuff like that. Martin, of course, wrote his own version of Forgotten Clubs, the Dutch League, which there was plenty of clubs to pick from, and there actually is another Dutch club in the book. So we may get Martin on to talk about them. But yeah, no, you're dead right. FC Amsterdam, one of the more interesting clubs, and it almost begs the question: could they come back in some sort of form and play in Amsterdam again?
I think to say that they couldn't would be maybe untrue, because, you know, obviously there's every chance that they could if someone wanted to found that sort of Phoenix club, if you like. But to say they would have any form of success or following, I'm not too sure. See, and this is where, you know, you kind of get into themes of nostalgia and historic support and stuff like that. Because say if Motherwell, the two kind of bigger teams in Lanarkshire in Scotland, okay, are Motherwell and Hamilton Academical, right? And that's contested as a derby. And it's, even though it's quite small, it's quite a fierce derby. You know, the fans really get behind it. And Hamilton and Motherwell are quite close to each other as towns, maybe a 10-minute drive. Say they decided to merge into, I don't know, Lanarkshire FC. You would still have fans there that said, well, hold on a minute, I don't really want to be sharing the stands with people who I've just spent the last however many years of my life shouting abuse at, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
understand what I'm saying. And also, you're talking about a club that, you know, you're completely changing the name, so you're not going to have that same association with the history of Motherwell or Hamilton anymore. They're just going to end up becoming the clubs who were merged. So you have that thing where already you're alienating quite a large part of the fan base, and I can imagine that's maybe what happened with the teams that merged to form FC Amsterdam.
Yeah.
And that you're basically erasing their history for this new sort of project where you're going to become the second team in a city. But also on top of that, you've got the aspect that they've now been bust for what it'll be over 50 years now. So if they did come back, it's maybe primarily going to be supported not by former fans of FC Amsterdam. There might be, you know, a few hundred, for example, but it's mainly going to be supported by people who've only read about them and then maybe don't have the same attachment to them unless it's been passed down to them generationally. So there's almost like this kind of element of, if it did reform and they did come back as FC Amsterdam, they wouldn't necessarily maybe be true to the club who were liquidated in the 70s or who pulled out of the league, sorry, I should say.
I think there was a club playing in the lower leagues called Amsterdam FC in Holland, if my memory serves me right. I'm not sure if they're still around. They never obviously touched or got near Ajax. But just for me, who loves and you were talking about local derbies there, it just seems a shame that Amsterdam doesn't have a local derby. Okay, they have a derby with Feyenoord, which is quite fierce itself. Obviously, they have a bit of a rivalry with PSV as well. But it's quite strange to me that a city like Amsterdam does not have a local derby, like the Milan derby, for example, or Glasgow derby, or even the Dublin derby. It's something. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe I'm just being a romanticist with football, because I love a local derby. But I'm just wondering even if Ajax fans miss that kind of touch to their season, or maybe they don't. Maybe they're happy enough to be a one club city.
Well, I mean, this is the thing. I mean, just from doing a quick sort of Google search, the population of Amsterdam within the city properly is about 921,000, about just under 1.5 million if you include the urban area. Now, the population of Glasgow is 1 million roughly, 1.5 million if you include Greater Glasgow.
Yeah.
Whereas the population of the city itself is 635,000. Now, it's quite obviously. I'm not a Dutch football expert by any means, and it's something that I'd need to look into in terms of the landscape of Dutch football as to why Ajax are the only team or the only senior team in Amsterdam or the only big team in Amsterdam, whichever you like to call it. But the fact that Glasgow has such a fierce derby as Celtic and Rangers, but Amsterdam doesn't, to me, seems it does seem a bit bizarre, doesn't it?
Yeah. That's what struck me when I was writing about this and researching about them. That's what struck me as one of the big things that, I always knew that Amsterdam was primarily a one-club city, but it's not until I done my research about FC Amsterdam and I was like, this club failed. They could have had a big derby. There could have been a huge thing here. Like, we could be speaking about the Amsterdam derby as a regular thing, like, as I said, like the Milan derby, like the Glasgow derby, but for whatever reason, the people of Amsterdam just didn't buy into it, and it's quite an interesting thing. Whether it's a social thing, whether it's an economic thing, it really is one of those things that I kind of, as I said, I did research, I did look into, and it's a bizarre kind of situation.
I suppose it really would depend. It depends a lot on the history of football within the city and the different conditions that lead to clubs being formed, and the conditions that lead to clubs such as FC Amsterdam becoming defunct. But if there is anyone listening to the podcast who is an expert on Dutch football or who is born and raised in Amsterdam and knows about this, please get in touch. We'd love to hear from you, and we'd love an answer to that, because it's very, very interesting. Because I mean, again, this is just off the top of my head, really, but I can't think of many cities within European football who are one club cities with clubs
like there's Napoli are one off the top of my head. Look, I mean, I ask Martin in the book, in the interview, does he ever see another Amsterdam club or an Amsterdam rivalry happening again, a major derby? And he basically says no, he can't see it happening, because the Dutch FA are the ones not allowing teams come up to the second division and to remain semi-professional. So there's obviously an economic reason, a financial reason that clubs can't survive, and the Dutch FA are quite wary of that, and they don't want another forgotten club like FC Amsterdam happening, or other clubs merging together. So it's quite interesting. As I said, Martin kind of just says that Amsterdam are popular, Ajax are the club, and everybody's got behind it, and there's no real kind of, nobody's going to break that.
Yeah, no, it is really interesting. I suppose it's if another Amsterdam club was to be founded, it would need to have the backing of some serious investment if they ever wanted to keep up with Ajax, if they even wanted to get to the top tier. And it would only really be in a situation like that I could see that happening. From an outsider looking in, of course, I'm quite interested myself in clubs that have been born as a result of mergers for a few different reasons that we'll talk about on another show. So I'm looking forward to talking more about clubs that have done that, because I just think it's fascinating how you can take two teams who have two very distinct set of fans and just completely erase that to create this new thing, unless it's been asked for by the fans, or to maintain a club or to ensure its sustainability and longevity. But I think it's really, really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, as I said again in the interview with Martin, and he's the man, Dutch football expert. He's written books about this. Again, he basically just says they're set in their ways. The Dutch FA, the Netherlands, it's quite a closed. He actually used the word a closed pyramid, where the big clubs have the monopoly and nobody else is able to come up the ranks, and it's kind of just set. The Premier, the First Division, the Eredivisie, and that's that. There's no kind of open door for any new ideas or new football clubs. So I mean, we're probably just going to have to settle for a Feyenoord Ajax rivalry for the rest of our lives.
It's fine by me. Fantastic derby, absolutely fantastic.
Oh, great derby! I've actually been to the Amsterdam Arena myself. So yeah, a soft spot for Ajax. to say the least. And maybe an unconscious decision to put FC Amsterdam in the book and do my research on it. But no, look, that's great, Rory. I mean, a great insight to one of the Netherlands forgotten clubs. As I said, we do have another one from the Netherlands, which we'll tell the story of in a future episode. So I suppose they're the two clubs that we have spoken about in the first episode here of the Forgotten Football Clubs podcast. As I said, there is 50 clubs, all based in the book. And just before we go, I haven't forgotten, the question that we are asking the listeners here is, who was Sporting Fingal's top goal scorer in their first season, in their debut season in the first division? He got 16 goals that season. We already know it's not Conan Byrne. Sorry, Conan. So you can mark that off. We know it's not Eamon Zaid, as he wasn't there. But can anybody else, our listeners, tell us? If you can't tell us, we'll put up the question on our Twitter page, Forgotten Clubs, and all you have to do is retweet it and basically comment in the comments the name of the top goal scorer of Sporting Fingal in their first season. As I said, he got 16 goals. I'll give you one other clue. He was on the books of Blackburn Rovers. If you get the answer right, as I said, comment underneath the tweet that we're going to put out, retweet it, of course, and we will then pick out one of the people who have given the correct answer, and they will win the prize of a free copy of Forgotten Football Clubs, 50 clubs around the world. It will be sent out to you free of charge, postage, all that. It doesn't matter where you are in the world, it will be sent to you. But you have to answer, obviously, the question correctly, retweet it, and obviously put the answer or the comment underneath the tweet that we put out. And that'll obviously show that you listened to the show.
No Googling either. We'll know if you've cheated. And he had quite a good career around Ireland, by the looks of things, quite nomadic almost, with a couple of spells in England. So that should give you guys a clue if you're struggling to think of it. But we'll put the tweet up. If you retweet it, if you comment under it, and if you leave us a like, we will look through the correct answers and we'll pick a winner through a kind of random name generator sort of thing, and then we'll get that copy shipped out to you. So I think that's quite a fun way to end the first episode. It's been fun.
It has, Rory, and I can't wait for the next one where we will be talking about two other football clubs. We will randomly pick them from the book. So please, if you have the book, do read it. And if you have any suggestions of who you want to listen to earlier on, please do give us them as well. And please interact with us on Twitter and Instagram. We have an Instagram as well. And thank you for listening. Cheers, Rory.
Cheers, Phil. Take care.